Thanks for coming to my show.
You're welcome.
It's like,
I'm so happy to see this in my own eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah, in person. So actually these are a bit difficult to capture. I mean, it's not so visible from the photos.
Yeah.
With all these textures and layers.
Yeah.
And also photos, especially on like screens,
yeah.
they make it look really flat in a sense, but you actively resist making that super flat works.
Yeah, I think that in them, I wanted to make simultaneously a real space while at the same time almost like a space that you can't really enter because you're so confronted with its material.
There are actually some three-dimensional works, installations and even films that you have created before. So how have you, arrived at this medium in particular, and you are, as you say, dealing with the landscape painting as a medium.
Yeah.
So
in painting and sculpture, I always go back to like kind of classics, and I think of them kind of like a dump truck that, you know, is just very reliable and it can carry a ton of stuff from point A to point B. And, you know, it's like as we exist, you know, with these, you know, sort of modalities from landscape to like a floral still life to the reclining figure to even memento mori or whatever, you know, I think that those things are so durable as vessels. And so because they've like stuck within, you know, like sort of cultural framework of how we express ourselves as artists for so long that their banality and their like integrity is so strong that you can project that they can hold a lot of different ideas.
it's sort of a staple of ideas
Yeah.
that you can refer to.
Yeah, yeah, like, and it can hold it all. And so, and I think too, you know, it's like because, you know, a rectangle with a representation of landscape has persisted for so long that they also become almost mirror-like, where like we see ourselves reflected in them. It could be as something as simple as being aesthetically pleasing, but what I'm interested in is like where do these paintings and where do these references point to me as an individual, you know, kind of point to me as an American, and like where do I see myself reflected in some of the ideas of how these spaces are represented. And so
actually the genre, I mean landscape painting as a genre, it's not so popular, I must say.
Yeah.
And as I said, you have done so many different kinds of works.
Yeah.
But now you are coming back to this genre.
Yeah.
So
well, I mean, I think I actually don't see it as coming back. I think that, you know, particularly in relationship.
It has been there.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, a fundamental way to understand the United States is like through the window of an automobile. And I think that because of like how big it is and the kind of how empty it is in places, that like the landscape is like so central to, I think, so many things that I think about, you know, like from manifest destiny to like, you know, concepts of ownership to like to even to assumptions to where people should be or should not be, you know, and that's like in the national park is like the only place, the only animal in the national park that can't go off the trail. You know, it's like the person's not trusted in the wilderness because they're just going to go and mess it up. Yeah. And so, you know, I think that for all those reasons that landscape has been central, you know, even back to like 2006, you know, taking pictures of rocks that look like people and living in a van to like, even when I was drag racing, it was like that it was about the movement over the land and like seeing how things that I believe, whether I like it or not, are embedded in how I see that, you know.
I think you are really keen on seeing through the landscape, especially that even just before you came to Korea, you took a little bit of time to drive all the way through the United States.
Yes. Yeah.
If I understood correctly.
Yeah, from New York to Wyoming, yeah.
So on that trail, have you also, how do I say, seen or not through your work, but captured in your mind or your mental image, the landscapes and their images as well?
Yeah, I mean, the the path that I went on, is I-80. And I-80 is basically, the Oregon Trail that sprouted off to Salt Lake City, to San Francisco, and then up to Olympia, Washington, where I grew up. And that, but before it was the Oregon Trail, this was a path that people took for thousands of years because it was the path of least resistance. And so, but then and when you think about the collapse of that history from indigenous people to Europeans moving westward and homesteading and so on and so forth, all the way till like when the interstate system was developed. And the interstate system was developed to move people, but was also intended to move really, really big objects, right? For killing people. And like to oversimplify that sounds like a stupid thing to say, but the interstate system was to move troops and weapons. So, and so when I think about, like every trip that I make, west from New York, that you're really confronted with the landscape and what it means, and you don't have to scratch very deep or to look very deep to not see a reflection of yourself in that landscape and what it means. So,
in terms of the mechanics of creation or the production process of the creation, it's also very intriguing to note that these are not. I mean, there's a huge contrast happening at the same time during the production process where you subtract and accumulate at the same time. I studied it. I tried to understand with my best knowledge of it, but it was a little difficult to understand that these processes of adding and removing are happening at the same time. So maybe could you explain it in a more friendly language?
Yeah.
Maybe for those who see this on the screen might think that these are just maybe flat images with a little bit of curve, but actually it's not. So
one of the things you can see, in the top left corner, you see these striated lines. These are moments in the laser where there's a lag time of giving the proper amount of wattage to create a uniform etch. And in that area, you can see actively the color of the sky being etched away by a machine. That concept is used to create kind of like all of the painted areas of the painting, where I'm making layers of color, spraying layers of color, and then using the laser to take the colors away that don't belong there. And so if we think about like an inkjet printer, right? Inkjet printer leaves little dots, right? And those little dots interrelate to create a polychrome image, right?
They are kind of mixed, simultaneously to create colors.
Yes, And so what I'm doing is that I'm putting down yellow, magenta, blue, black in succession on top of each other, but I paint yellow, and then I've created a series of really weird bitmap JPEG files to trick the laser into uniformly taking away everything that's not yellow.
So you are basically adding and subtracting, but then adding and then subtracting and repeating it.
Yes. And so what you're looking at is the interplay between yellow, magenta, cyan, and black, and the transparency. So when the paint is left behind, that what you're seeing is the translucency of those layers, the luminosity of the white to create, from yellow to pink and blue and whatever color. And so that's one way that they're made. The reason why I'm particularly interested in that is that this is a photomechanical process.
Meaning that you cannot control everything?
No, meaning that it's not chemical, right? And so one of the things that photography struggled with in the late 19th century is how do you mass produce an image, right? Because you can't, you can't do like a silver, like a like black and white photograph in every book. It would be physically very difficult. And so a huge amount of the mass production of imagery was dependent upon the engraver, right? Or of another artist to interpret an image, to then put it into a format
that can be printable
printed
and
over
mass
and over.
distributable.
Yeah. And it's until we developed photogravure or photo etching, that's like when we're able to mass produce photographic imagery in books. And so because of my knowledge of printmaking and the history of that, is that I'm totally obsessed with like finding ways to create images that seem to land on a surface or to land on a piece of paper. That this was a way that I could almost make like a ghost, to make it that something is happening on the surface rather than to be applied, like with a brush or something. And it's also another way to get away entirely from like any kind of unique artistic gestural stroke or like a fussiness. They're a product of a lot of different decisions being made individually and just kind of hoping that they're going to work out. And I think that surprise, I think that if we always knew what we were making, then why would we make them? You know, there has to be some element of discovery, some element of surprise in making a thing. And so all of these stay in pieces pretty much for their entire creation until the very last minute when they're assembled and like vacuum bagged onto the panel. You know, that's where we can get like the curve in the sky. Like they're like really loud things in the painting, and then there are also very quiet things in the painting, and having all of those work in concert is like in that moment of, because once it's glued and once it's in the vacuum bag, it's too late. Like you can't move anything. And so I think that's like, you know, we haven't talked about this, but I think about like faith in a weird way. And I think like growing up with like a fairly religious, my mother was fairly religious, that I think that there is like that, like having faith that the things are going to work out the way that they're supposed to. Mine isn't tethered to God or whatever, but it's like, no, I think like I know the process and materials individually well enough that all of the intention that I've put into them are going to settle upon each other in a way that at the very least will be strange. Whether it's good.
But with that knowledge, you can kind of let the work go by itself.
Yeah.
After a certain process.
Yeah. And it's like, and I think to muscle something through in developing a process that's like kind of distanced from me is a way to kind of to put forth something in its creation that is going to accumulate in a way that's its own thing and not totally dependent on me making it all.
After this, we can talk a little bit about this abstract idea of memory and history, and then that'll be, we cover everything.
If we cover memory and history, like 4 or 5 sentences, we'll be able to figure it out. Yeah. No, it's like that, you know, I think that like what we've talked about earlier in terms of like the reproduction, just like the constant onslaught of imagery that piles up an accumulation so that you can't see beneath it, is that you have like simultaneously the inability to see to the past and or to contextualize it. So it's like we're never allowed to really remember anything. And I think that like perpetual state of newness is like something that I fundamentally understand, like growing up in the American, like Pacific Northwest and the suburbs, you know, that like it's like built into the system of like developing
everything has to be refreshed,
like brand new. It's like everything's new. You don't build up, you build out, you know. And I think that's like, you know, that relationship to the landscape and the way that the way that I was raised, it's like to be kept in a persistent state of amnesia, or to never be allowed really to remember anything, you know, because there's also the educational standpoint, which is, you know, growing up in a religious cult.
Yeah.
I'm not saying my family, like I think that being an American, it's like growing up in a religious cult. There are certain things that you have to believe just on their face value, or else you can't really, really believe all the other stuff.
So here in your paintings, you are, instead of creating something that has never seen before, you are revisiting, reusing, or someone might say you are recycling the popular images.
Yeah.
but actually I was born in Korea, so I could see that something is being reused, but I do not clearly recognize some of them. So could you maybe point out a few things that's maybe so obvious to the American viewers?
Yeah, I think the paintings, the main foreground is taken directly from a painting by Albert Bierstadt of Yosemite Valley, and combined with other images from NASA of moons
Like
that,
the moon
that
here.
are around Jupiter, to a photograph of the Matterhorn in Disneyland.
But
in
why
Anaheim.
is Matterhorn is in Disneyland from the first place? You said that this would be maybe the first mountain that many American children ever see
Yeah.
for the first time in
Yeah,
their
to
life.
see it to see a mountain up close. I think that growing up, it's in Southern California, that is likely true. That the first mountain that a child would see would be not a mountain at all, but rather a roller coaster. And I think that there's something about, we haven't talked about this, but the way that it's constructed is architecturally nearly identical to the construction of the casinos on the main strip in Las Vegas, right?
Which is a huge facade.
Which is a facade basically stuck to a steel system where you could just change the skin out and it could become something totally new. And so to a certain degree, that the shape of the Matterhorn could be adapted to then become another massif, like a different mountain. And I think that there's something that's that the skin on the thing is so central to, I think, the veneer, that fleshy layer is really central to, I think, my American identity. It's beneath that we get lost in terms of what supports it, where does it come from, what is the structure that holds it all together. And I think that's I think that putting Bierstadt in relationship to this representation of another real place, for me they fit perfectly together. And so I think that going back to the title of Counter Earth, it's to represent a place that is at once recognizable while at the same time being something totally alien. And then what we were talking about earlier of actually kind of being kind of weirdly against Earth. And so the strange coloring and how they're put together is to make them weird. If you look closer, the painting, the color of the painting, and then the surface of the painting don't match up.
Yeah.
They're close enough where one
here that you see.
Yeah, they're close enough where one could think oh, this is a rocky, cliff face. But really, the way that the marks are made are run against the image. And so making that sort of purgatorial space where it's it wants a space to enter, but then the real space that the painting's made out of is, you're so confronted with its materiality that it doesn't let you in a weird way.
Something is off in this image. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not sure I should say that off in a good way or in a bad way, but definitely in a intriguing way. That close enough you see, as you said, something is not exactly matching with the colors and the shape, and also with the contour of this etched surface. Yeah,
I think that for me, that thinking about something as banal as landscape, as confrontational, is I feel it's an old fighter that still has enough of a right hook to still contend, to still challenge our perception, and I think it's and I think that's really what I get excited about. That this thing that we've looked at so many of them that we can imagine being in them, but in their material being, that they're still challenging enough to make us aware of standing in the place that we're looking at it from.
And I also wonder your observation about these questions that we got from journalists, especially yesterday,
Yeah.
that some of these paintings reminded especially Koreans of the traditional Oriental landscape paintings.
Yeah.
I mean, my opinion first, I think maybe these comments are based on the fact that these ancient Oriental paintings are also mental images rather than the realistic depiction of the real landscape.
Yeah. But in that mental image, I think that, you know, like one of the things that I like to talk about landscape, when you close your eyes and you think about outside, what a tree looks like or what a mountain looks like, it's an accumulation of your like childhood relationship to the outdoors, but also at the same time, how it's been represented over our life and what we can accept as being beautiful and real. And so I think that like these paintings come from very specific places, right? But if someone were to be from another, you know, someplace else and think about the traditions of landscape relative to their own like understanding and awareness and appreciation, you know, that's great. Because I actually think that the relationships that I'm trying to talk about in the work is not something that's just American. It's something that, like, that we, our relationship to our natural environment in the 21st century is one that is rapacious and neglectful, and one that is like, it's almost like we don't live here, you know, like that as if we're alien and separated from it entirely. And so I think in that regard, I really appreciate it when people bring other like baggage into the dump truck, because the dump truck can take it, like just like put it in the dump truck, it'll be great. But yeah.
Yeah, so like some of them show Qing Dynasty nature paintings.
Yeah.
Some of them show traditional Joseon period painting of mountains and rivers.
Yeah.
So listening to that, I could also see what they were thinking,
Yeah.
although these works were not done with these ideas in mind.
No, but I think when I was in, studying art history in college, that those paintings, from China and how the rocks and the trees were represented, but also the mythologies that revolved around them were things that I was totally inspired by, but not for the making of these paintings.
I mean, slightly off the topic, but like these traditional Oriental paintings, they are actually really, really readable images.
Yes.
Like certain kinds of trees that you see in these paintings, you can guess which year, which period it has been produced because of this all of this symbolism.
Yeah.
Not like the ancient Egyptian paintings, but still. I mean, I think the same applies to the landscape paintings that you are referring to, Caspar David Friedrich.
Yeah, in the case of this one, for sure. Yeah, but it's funny, like with this, like the thing that I do think about that goes outside of Caspar David Friedrich, I think about Tarkovsky's Solaris. And so when I see the frozen sea of Caspar David Friedrich, I think about the sentient.
You see the connection?
The sentient sea of it's like this like alien landscape that is like sentient and thinking. It's like maybe not the smartest thing to say, but that's what I think. I think about Tarkovsky a lot in these works, but yeah.
I don't know. I mean, now I wonder that this visit to Seoul is not so long. I mean, it's not 1 month residency.
No.
You are just visiting for the exhibition, but I am wondering, was there any idea being developed from all the conversations that we had and things that you have seen in the city, and also from the feedback that you got from the people in here? Yeah. So,
I mean, I think that, for me, the most beautiful thing about being able to show my work, in the world is it engenders relationships that I hope lead to more meaningful collaborations and, making stuff. I think that's because it's, the only thing that we really ever get to have is just our experiences and our relationships. All the other shit is just like not ours. And so I think, you know, even going to the museum yesterday, of seeing so many things that I didn't know, that don't understand, and even, you know, ties to my own familial history to this particular place is like something that I want to mine and understand better. So yeah, so I'm hopeful that, you know, it's not just like a show in a gallery, but rather friendships and relationships that accumulate over my lifetime.
Yeah,
so.
I want to see your other works in the exhibition setting, and also like, since you are so adaptive, should I say, or very dexterous maker.
Yeah.
So I want to see you making other stuff as well.
Yeah, great. Hopefully. Yay. Thanks.
Yes.